I wasn't sure how to open this, but this struck me that, next year is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It's a big year for us. And so I'm going to focus on the British Isles. So it includes Ireland, for example. So Ireland, we think of from a religious standpoint, the Irish Catholic, famously, and report to the Pope. That's the supreme authority, the head of the church. For the English, Anglican, the head of the church is the Archbishop of Canterbury, but the supreme authority is actually the king. So King Charles is the head. So, but in Scotland, of course, the governance is, as we know, it's the session, it's the Presbyterian, it's the General Assembly. So far more democratic. Right? It's about the rights of the individual, and that's sort of the big part of this is the Scottish. The Scots rejecting Catholicism, rejecting Anglicanism, and going their own way, which is the Calvinism. So that's the. Sorry, I meant to bring this into it, which is this book here. So many know this book from officer training years ago. So the link from the Scottish Reformation and independence to the U.S. So it is said here. The American Revolution, the involvement of Presbyterians in the war for American independence is a story of legendary proportions. From the English point of view, the revolution was sometimes perceived as a Presbyterian rebellion. Indeed, one disgusted loyalist grumbled that the American colonies had run off with a Presbyterian parson. Almost to a man, Presbyterian clergy in America took up the patriot cause and provided warm support for the cause of liberty from the pulpits. It was obviously that kind of link that I think is actually quite interesting. None that any of this was achieved without some huge element of bloodshed, unfortunately. And that seems to be a fact that we get in our own ways, in our own way when it comes to Christian fellowship. So we have killed each other quite readily, and suggest we have more in mind as humans than the kingdom of heaven. So I wanted to open with a quick prayer. Dear Lord, despite our differences, despite our disagreements, let us above all love each other as you would have us do. In Jesus' name, amen. That's the ideal. Okay, so the Scots-Irish Presbyterian and other things. I was roaming around in the W&L bookstore and came across this book, Scots-Irish by James Layburn. I don't know if anybody's ever read it before. I thought that would be interesting, I think. So I kind of browsed through it and thought, well, maybe we could do a series on the Scots-Irish. And probably a lot of you do have some connection with Scots-Irish, yes?
I don't. So Scots-Irish, but those that books that Scotch.
Yes, thank you for that.
Well, that's not.
I'm going to
Irish and alcohol.
There's also been this book that came out years ago, Born Fighting by Jim Webb, who was Secretary of Defense and U.S. Senator. So this is also a book that I've never actually read. In fact, I haven't read it yet, but anyway. Okay, so moving ahead, a lot of slides here. So Scots-Irish, and this is kind of a random presentation. So let me move on here. How do I do this?
Let me change the focus. Hang on. Okay, now it should work. There we go.
Okay, so who are the Scotch-Irish? For our purposes, they're Scots who migrated to Ireland, and then in the early 1600s, and then migrated to the American colonies in the early 1700s, for our purposes. Why do they keep moving around so much? That's sort of the theme of the whole Scotch-Irish history. Now, we usually call this group Scotch-Irish, but somebody said, no, you can't call them Scotch-Irish because Scotch is like the drink or the Scotch tape or something. It's an adjective, you got to fit with people. So we said, okay, fine. We're sensitive people. We'll call you Scots-Irish. And we told them, hey, we're calling you Scotch-Irish now. And they said, that's interesting because we call ourselves Ulster Scots. So that's a little confusing. Why should we care about the Scots-Irish? Because we wouldn't be here in this building without them. Scots-Irish settled Mecklenburg County, and they're responsible for the Presbyterian, all the churches here. So we're indebted to them in that sense. The Scots-Irish were instrumental in establishing the Presbyterian Church in the American colonies in the early days. And they were the pioneers. They're the ones with the arrows in their back. They're the ones who went into the pioneers, into the forest, fighting the Indians. They're the vanguard, the pioneers from the Appalachians down through, from Pennsylvania down to Alabama. And we kind of view them, I don't know how accurate this is, we kind of view them as tough, independent, indomitable, politically involved, like famously Andrew Jackson, and Calvinists. And how do we square fighting and drinking, which is also attributed to the Scots-Irish, with Calvinism? I've never understood that. Now, you don't have to be Scottish heritage or you're Presbyterian. Of course, there's probably many in this room who have no Scottish heritage at all. Absolutely fine. Many of you probably do. The first African Presbyterian church was founded in Philadelphia in 1807. The first Presbyterian church in New York City was established in 1822. And the first African American to attend Princeton Theological Seminary in 1827, way before the Civil War, way before the 13th Amendment. And just to keep us a little bit humble, yes, okay, we are the center of the universe in some sense, we think that, but there's about 1.5 million Presbyterians in the US, I think. I heard the other day from somebody said that in the PC USA, it's under 1 million members, which is it's just sad. But in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, 14 million Presbyterians, and over 9 million Presbyterians in South Korea. Isn't that amazing to think about? Think about the Great Commission, think about the what has transpires in the 1800s and 20th century. So we need to know more about that. I think we need to know more about that. Might be a future study. So you may be bored by this because a lot of you know been to Scotland many times, maybe. But there's Scotland, way north. You know, Edinburgh's higher northern latitude than Copenhagen. Surrounded by water, North Sea, North Atlantic Ocean. You know this, probably. There it is, surrounded by water, not an island. Somebody thought Scotland was an island. No, not an island, but lots of water, more coastland than England has. You can see, where's the
bottom button is the.
bottom?
There you
So
go.
there's Edinburgh, there's Glasgow. Might be familiar with this. There's Northern Ireland. Ulster, talk about that. This is all England down here. The islands here, the sky. These are all the highlands up here, and some little indentations there. Okay. Edinburgh's the same latitude as Moscow, but the climate is moderate because of the warming effects of the Gulf Stream. Think wet, chilly, dark winters, wet, cool summers, moderated by the warming effects of Scotch culture. The soil is thin. 5/6 of the land not suitable for farming, according to the World Book Encyclopedia in 1959. Thin soil, acidic, lots of bogs and moors. I might be overdoing this a bit, but it's a poor country from an agricultural standpoint. Also, it was deforested by 1500. All the trees were cut down. There weren't any trees left, so they had to use peat to get fuel instead of wood. Wood was very expensive in 1500. I use 1500 as a marking date because the Reformation formally starts 1517. So you get it. Scotland's a poor country from an agricultural standpoint, not exactly the Fertile Crescent. And there's Shutterstock's portrayal. So you don't see wheat fields, in the lowlands. And there's the Scottish heating unit. That's good. That's what helps us along. So we got about the highlands versus the lowlands. So I mentioned oops. So wait a minute. Okay, so okay, that's the line. This line varies, but this is all higher altitude land here, lower in the lowlands. There's Glasgow and Edinburgh again. Northern Ireland. But this is from a cultural standpoint, this is huge in terms of thinking about the Scots-Irish because they're all lowlanders. Highlanders, though, they get all the attention. They're the ones in the movies. Everybody loves the Highlanders. Everyone wants to wear kilts. Everyone wants to belong to a clan. Everyone wants to play the bagpipes. All the movies, where they're all featuring the Scottish Highlanders who speak Gaelic and fighting all the time and so forth. The Lowlanders were by far the majority, Scots lived like 75%, 80%, no kilts. They do have bagpipes, it turns out, but they're smaller bagpipes. The Scots-Irish were Lowlanders, that's important, I think, in some sense. And there is, if you look at Highland, that's Liam Neeson, they're playing Rob Roy. He's actually Northern Irish, with a Catholic identity. And there's the Highlanders, this is what everybody wants. You can see, what's it say, tartan vibes clothing, so you can buy, no matter, my joke is, I still tell my joke is, if your name is Budweiser, they'll find a clan for it, yeah, they'll sell you Budweiser tartan if you want it. And there's a Lowlander, that's actually Robert Burns there, see, he's just garbed in plain breeches with stockings and, there's no, it's not serious, it's kind of boring, kind of boring, Lowlanders are boring. Okay, so where did the Scots come from? It's the whole story of Europe, Celtic tribes moving from one place for another, looking for better jobs, going by boat. The main tribes identified are the Celtic Picts, you might have heard of the Picts, and the Scati, who came over from Ireland to Western Scotland. Hunter-gatherers moving around, Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc. Later invasions from the Germanic Angles, so Anglo-Saxon, the Angles came up and pushed the Gaelic-speaking Scots out. So that's why you have two different Highlands, the Gaelic speakers, the Highlanders, traditionally, and the Scots speakers. The Scots is a separate language, I've read, I always thought of a dialect, but it's a separate language. Think Robert Burns, and here's a famous line, the best laid schemes of mice and men gang aft the glay, often go awry. If you study German, you'd see that it's very similar to the German gegangen and off. So it's obviously German is good. The Romans, thank goodness for the Romans, because they actually write things down. Usually not necessarily accurately, however, they embellished their victories and so forth. The Romans invaded Scotland and defeated the Caledonians, as they called them, but they didn't stay. They pulled back behind the Hadrian Wall. There's other walls too that they had. Why? Because Scotland just wasn't worth, they couldn't grow grapes there, just when it's cold, it's dry, they couldn't grow anything. So they just went behind the wall. So almost all of Scotland was not Romanized, just a tiny portion in the east part of it. Okay. And the Picts, famous for painting themselves blue. You'll see that sometimes. That they're the typical, barbarians, not very friendly. Okay, so, and those of us who went to Scotland know this because we went to Iona. The Scottish heathen are converted. So by 380 AD, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. Amazing story, amazing Paul, amazing converting the Gentiles and pagans to Christianity, I think. And it happened everywhere. It happened in England, Ireland, and then Columba comes over from Ireland into Iona, and eventually all Scotland becomes Catholic. Everybody's Christianity is pervasive, and everybody is Catholic. Okay, so one main thing of the Scots, they hate the English. Why? That's their early enemy, because England is always trying to subdue the Scots. They always want to take over the Scots. So there's constant wars. For centuries, they've been fighting. Borders hotly contested. England wants Scotland to be a vassal state. And the histories of England and Scotland are inextricably intertwined, which I cannot say after 2 Scottish eating minutes. So think of independence, think of Braveheart, William Wallace, Robert the Bruce. Actually, Scotland did achieve independence back in 1290. Now, so Scotland's besieged by England all the time. Where do they go for help? Who hates England more than anybody in the world? France. France is the spoiler. The old alliance, the Scots call it. So the French are helping out the Scots, but the Scots think, I think we're helping out you more than you're helping out us. It's just really in our favor. But that is that's the 3 parties involved in all this conflict. Scotland's sort of the pawn. France and England are big players. By 1500, so with the eve of the Reformation, 500,000, mostly in the lowlands, as I mentioned before. The governing system is feudal, clans in the Highlands. I read that for a clan, so like McDonald's, for example. Everybody who's in the McDonald clan is named McDonald, whether you're related to McDonald's or not, everybody's McDonald, that's how the clan's for. Feudal system, there's a lord, there's various tenants under that, depending on your status. Everybody is Roman Catholic, right, 1500. Except for some pockets. The Catholic Church is, so the Catholic Church, like it was in Europe, very helpful in the Dark Ages, the monasteries, kept it together, helped the people. But over time, the Catholic Church became more and more wealth. When there's wealth, there's power, and wealth and power corrupt, as we know. And so the church became quite corrupt by the time of 1500, as it was in other parts of Europe, I believe. Okay, so in Scotland, an early challenge to the church. Well, there were grumblings in Europe. Remember Jan Hus, for example, and they get so people who have money and power. How do they react when their power and money is challenged? They react harshly. They basically burn them at the stake in the case of religious fractions. So Martin Luther famously nails his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church. And Luther he has protection for one thing. He survives. I think it's Frederick the Wise, protects him. But also, this is a good break. It's just done a printing press. And so now you can take Luther's words and spread them across Europe, and that's what happens. So young, idealistic young men mainly and women start reading the tracts and are getting very interested. It gets to a point where, and oops. In 1525, so not that long after Luther first nails the thesis, the Scholar Parliament is always saying, look, okay, no more of this stuff coming in, it's forbidden. A young priest in Scotland, Patrick Hamilton, he marries, he's a Catholic priest, he marries, he adopts Lutheran principles, he is burned at the stake. That's what happens. They do that by a fellow named Cardinal David Beaton, who'll come up again, he's a notorious figure. Okay, now this is really interesting. So, Henry VIII, everybody knows Henry VIII, Henry VIII, and you know the story. So, when Luther first comes out, Henry VIII denounces Luther, because Henry VIII is a great Catholic, and he gets the title Defender of the Faith. Others get the same title, actually, but he has a problem. And this problem is, he's been married to Catherine Aragon for 23 or 24 years. They have one child, Mary, no son. Problem, he wants an heir. You gotta have an heir. So he goes to the Pope, Pope Clement, and says, I need an annulment so I can marry Anne Boleyn. That's what I want to do. And the Pope says, no. And the reason why the Pope says no is because of a number of reasons. One is, first of all, he's been married for 23 years and has a child, but that's not really an obstacle for the Pope. The one problem is that the Catherine of Aragon, who is the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, remember them, Columbus? Her nephew, Catherine Aragon's nephew, is Charles V, who's the Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful person in Europe, also the King of Spain. And he had just sent his troops through Italy and held Clement VII in captivity for 6 months. So Clement's saying, yeah, let's see, who am I gonna upset? Charles V or you? Annulment denied. King Henry VIII is not happy about this. This is not what he wants. So, there he is. I call him Cuddles because he's like a person. Everybody loves this guy, right? So, but he has this great guy, Thomas Cromwell, who's in the Henchman Hall of Fame. He's a great advisor. And he has a cunning plan. His plan is, look, here's what we're gonna do. Just to say, look, appoint yourself head of the church in England. Thereby, you can annul your own marriage, and here's the kicker: you get all the church property. course, the Catholic Church is enormously wealthy in England. It's fantastic. It's a great idea. And Thomas Cromwell gets promoted. Eventually, he falls out of favor and is killed by Henry VIII, but that's another story. And so Henry had what he wants. He wants, he gives Anne Boleyn, a child. She meets a untimely death and marries Jane Seymour, and he gets a male heir, the future Edward VI in 1537. So Henry VIII is elated, and he has his own church, basically. That's Thomas Cromwell. He is a henchman. Is it just like that? Okay. Meanwhile, back in Scotland. What's going on in Scotland? It's big on Scotland. Okay, so this is a little complicated. I'm sorry for it, but it's sort of sense. So the Stuarts are in charge, and have been for a long time. So all the way up to James IV. He marries Margaret Tudor, who's Henry VIII's sister. And they signed the Treaty of Perpetual Peace, which lasted about a year. James IV was killed fighting the English. That has to do because Henry VIII invaded France, and James IV thought he should help the English, and so it didn't work out for him. His son, James V, his nephew, Henry VIII, he becomes King of Scotland 12 days. He marries Mary of Guise of France, who's important. And he dies fighting the English too. And he fights them because Henry VIII said to him, look, I have my own church here now, the Anglican Church, and I think it'd be a great idea if you guys became part of the Anglican Church. And James V says no, and that's a problem. So there's a war, he ends up dying, and his daughter is the famous Mary, Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart, great niece to Henry VIII. She becomes Queen of Scotland at 6 days old. So I think that's a record, perhaps. So what if, so this is what Henry VIII says, this is fantastic. What if my 5-year-old son married Mary Queen of Scots and they have kids? Then they'd be a united Tudor kingdom of England and Scotland. This is what I want. And some Scots who are anti-French think it's a good idea, but Parliament does not. And Henry VIII is very upset with this, and releases a horrible war, started a war called the Rough Wooing in 1548, which lasted about 9 years. Catholic Scotland survives. In the meanwhile, Mary is sent to France to become engaged to the Dauphin, the heir to the French throne, which, if you're in Philly, you can't say Dauphin. You just can't say, I meet you at the corner of 3rd and Dauphin. It's Dauphin Street in Philly. Leslie told me that joke. So there's something about Mary. Mary is everything you have heard about. Beautiful, young. She lives in Uxbridge in France. She goes native. She speaks perfect French. She calls and dances. It's fantastic. And she's Catholic, of course. And the Dauphin becomes king, so she becomes Queen of France. She's the Queen of Scotland and Queen of France at age 16. But sadly, the King of France is sickly, he dies. Now she's a widow at 18, no children, and therefore no further use of the French. C'est le monde. Mary has no recourse but returning to Scotland in 1561. I was wrong. That's it, Leslie? Okay. It's just, am I going too fast?
No.
Okay. There she is. That might be her, but she was, by all accounts, some of the portraits you see her, you think, she is reportedly quite beautiful. Some people said 6 feet tall. Some people I talked to in the streets. From my sources. Meanwhile, so what's happening in Scotland? So let's not all this happening with Mary in France and so forth. So what's happening in Scotland? Well, it's not exactly all glitter and fine stuff. So oops, what's happened here? Lost control of the. Okay. All right, so yeah, there are young idealists. They love the idea of what they're reading about Protestantism, challenging the corrupt Catholic Church. And they gain followers, including a former Catholic priest, John Knox. They're always the best reformers, right? The Catholic, ex-Catholic priests. Now, Cardinal Beaton is in 1546, he's killed because he had just recently approved the burning the stake of George Wishart, who was another young reformer. In retaliation, he is brutally murdered. Cardinal Beaton is, I mean, he's like the epitome of corrupt. He has 20 illegitimate children, but when he's actually dragged out of bed and murdered, he's in bed with his mistress. He's not exactly the paragon of virtue. Anyway, what happens though is that the Catholic Scots get the French to help them out, and John Knox, famous John Knox, our John Knox, is captured and sentenced to be a French galley slave in 1547. So I know this is confusing, so much going on. But Knox is released after 2 years, the English get him out, and he goes to John Knox, our Presbyterian founder, goes to England and becomes a preacher to Edward VI, the young Edward VI. So Knox is now Church of England, in effect, at that time. It gets more confusing. This is unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. However, he has to skedaddle from England because when Edward VI dies, his half sister, Bloody Mary, she's the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Remember Catherine of Aragon? She's the daughter of Bloody Mary. She's nice, and she wants to transform England back to Catholicism, and almost succeeds. And I think she's queen for 3 to 5 years. But it's nasty. Hundreds of people were executed. It's close. And meanwhile, Knox is very angry with Mary the First, and also with Mary of Guise, who's the Queen Regent in Scotland. He writes this tract, the first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women. He has this thing with women, apparently, which he's like not in a good space to do this because eventually Elizabeth I of England is going to be in charge, and Mary Queen of Scots and so forth. So he's he gets himself on the wrong side of the feminist. He hangs out with John Calvin and becomes a fervent Calvinist, does John Knox. And he goes back to Scotland in 1559 to inspire the Scots to break ties with Rome and embrace Calvinism. Okay, a lot of moving parts here. And to inspire is easy to not curious later. That's a look. Opportunity knocks. Scottish. Okay, so you got two things. You have young idealists. You also have, how am I doing on time?
You're good.
You also have the nobility, the lords. And a lot of them are thinking about how much they don't like Catholicism so much. And also they kind of like the idea that King Henry VIII had this great idea of taking over church properties. And wouldn't that be a good idea? They could see themselves taking over church properties. The Queen is a Queen Regent at this time. It's actually Mary Queen of Scots' mother. And she has a following, but it's not solid. So they're able to gain traction. And they're getting some support from those who are anti-French. Their motivation is at least half, if not more, political and economic than it is religious. So it's a top-down movement. So the lords are doing this. So you're going to have this, obviously, this confrontation between the Catholic monarchy, which is the Queen Regent right now, with French support, and the Protestant lords are going to get support from England, because England always wants to do something that's in the thorn of France. And during this time, the Protestants prevail. It's a civil war, but it's not nearly as bloody as what it transpires on the continents. The Kirk. So with Knox back, and Knox is the leader of the religious movement. He's not political, but he's one that gives form to the movement, religious form to it. He's a talented orator, reformer, and more and more Scots are inspired by the Protestant movement and Calvinists, and more this time. But finally, in Scottish Parliament in 1560, ends Catholicism. The Scots Confession is written. The Presbyterian Church becomes the Church of Scotland in 1560. That's it. We've done it. We're out. The Kirk. But it's not really as simple as it sounds, because this is all happening in Edinburgh and some of the cities. who's hearing about it in the, in this villages and so forth. So it takes a long while for the rest of the country to become Protestant. They're just doing their thing in their villages. Labor, my friend Labor, he says, the Kirk won the awe and the admiration, if only the affection of the people, but it took some time to do that. My reading is it took over 130 years, but it's still it's a revolution. It's a revolution. The Catholics are kicked out, Protestants are in place. That's it. That's the Scottish Reformation. Except not so fast. Edward Mary quite contrary, because many in Scotland are adopting Presbyterianism. Mary Queen of Scots, she's Catholic to the core. What is she gonna do? She's 18 years old, this happened, so she's a freshman in college, basically. She arrives in Scotland, but she decides that the Scottish, the reformers are so strong in Scotland, she decides on a policy of conciliation. She's not gonna do what Bloody Mary tried to do. So here's one little comment. A lot of people think that had Bloody Mary lived longer than she did, England might have reverted to Catholicism. And some historians believe that if Mary Queen of Scots had taken a different view, had been a strong leader of the Catholics, with enough Catholic interest in Scotland, that she could also have overturned the recent Scottish Reformation. But she didn't. She followed a policy of conciliation. And she was very popular. I mean, she had glamour person coming in. Tall, athletic, everybody. There's a quote, what is it? Graceful and dazzlingly beautiful with her almond-shaped hazel eyes and auburn hair. She looked every inch of queen, and the common people loved it. She's a star. But there's always a but. Oh, well, there's Mel. There's Mary. So if there's Mary. There's two of her Mary attendants. That's posh Mary there, and that's Mary there. There's a fellow with like a lute or something, and I wonder who that is. It could be one of her retinue, maybe David Rizzio, which we'll talk about in a second. And there's a cardinal or somebody in the back there, showing her Catholicism. Beauty and the Beast, all tied up in locks. Yes. More bad puns. Mary confrontations with John Knox are well known. It's the stuff of Hollywood. And Knox was so vehement that he was so out of bounds that even the General Assembly censored him for his behavior towards Mary. Just tone it down. It's just, had a thing with women apparently. But Mary did not attempt to revoke the Reformation Acts. In fact, what she wanted to have was private Catholic mass be allowed, which it was, and she practiced her. Knox did not like that at all. He wanted to do with all of that. But she has actually the prosecution of public Catholic mass and campaign against fellow Catholics. She was popular. She seemed to be doing the right thing. And she was in tune with the whole Scottish movement until she wasn't, which happened. I'm not sure. Actually, speeding through this really rapidly. Her downfall. Have anybody here read about Lord Darnley?
I was just gonna say, if you're interested in Mary Queen of Scots, there's a really good podcast. The rest is history.
Yes.
It does like a 4 or 5 part series on Mary Queen of Scots. I learned a lot about Lord Darnley.
Yes, actually, and I listened to the same podcast, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It goes into great detail. Lord Darnley was handsome beyond belief, but he was a real rogue, he was Catholic, sort of, not practicing, very handsome. It doesn't allow, the marriage doesn't allow, he's drinking all the time, he's causing problems. The good thing is that Bruce, an heir to James the Sixth. Bad happens just about everything else. One thing is, Darnley and his friends, his Protestant friends, they end up killing a fellow named David Rizzio, who is secretary to Queen Mary, Queen of Scots. Rizzio is a singer, he's a dancer, he speaks multiple languages, he's a great conversationalist. And he's very attractive, and there's rumors that Darnley and he shared the same bed. There's also rumors that Rizzio was with Mary Queen of Scots and was actually the father to all kinds of rumors. Anyway, Darnley takes in his hands to murder Rizzio, which is bad. Then, you can correct me here, then Darnley goes off, Darnley is eventually murdered. Mary Queen of Scots is abducted by a fellow named Lord Bothwell, so Protestant, and she may not have been raped by him, it's known, but it's taken away, she marries him. But the marriage falls apart, and meanwhile, the political structure is falling apart, because people now are saying, what is wrong with this situation, what's wrong with this woman? And they start to, she loses support from the lords. And she's eventually abandoned by Lord Bothwell. She abdicates, she's forced to abdicate. She escapes to England. There's a conflict, a civil war. It's not a huge civil war. There's a civil war that's gone between the Protestants and the Catholics. The Protestants prevail. She's held captive then in England for many years. I forget how many years it is, 18 or so. She's looking for support from her cousin, which is Queen Elizabeth the First. That's her cousin, and her cousin is suspicious of Mary Queen of Scots because on more than one occasion, Mary Queen of Scots said that she was the rightful heir to the throne of England, not Queen Elizabeth, which was not received well by Queen Elizabeth. And eventually, there's enough rumors circulating that Mary Queen of Scots was executed by Queen Elizabeth I. They never met each other, but anyway, so it all fell apart. That's Mary Queen of Scots. And such promise in the beginning. Wait a minute, this is about Scots-Irish side. I got some sidetracked with Mary Queen of Scots. Okay, so James, the son of Mary, becomes James VI at age 13 months because of her abdication. She abdicates the throne and goes to England. And he is raised Presbyterian. He's a precocious child, very smart. He's brought up by a guy named George Buchanan. His Presbyterian instruction includes such things as the monarch's subjects retain the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and property. Kind of rings with us, doesn't it? James's view is a little bit different. It's like, the subjects, they're kind of my subjects. And the other person I'm answerable to is God alone. There's a great, well, I won't mention it. Anyway. James and the Giant Kirk. They're getting worse. With the death of John, so Andrew Melville, who's a big feature in the Presbyterian Church, Chuck's talked about him before. He takes over, and he's even a stronger personality than John Knox. And he and young James are not on the same page. He insists that the church is separate from the state. No interference by the crown and kirk affairs. Doesn't that ring for us? Well, James does not agree with us. He insists that church assemblies require the assent of the king and parliament. That is such the rub, isn't it? I am in charge. You are not in charge. And Melville's an often quoted statement. So I must tell you, there are two kings and two kingdoms in Scotland. There is Christ Jesus the King, and his kingdom the Kirk, whose subject King James VI is, and whose kingdom not a king, nor a lord, nor a head, but a member. So they weren't seeing eye to eye. However, something happens, which is Elizabeth I, famously the Virgin Queen, dies without an heir. And this is an incredible twist. So James the Sixth of Scotland, raised Presbyterian, becomes James the First of England, as well as King of Scotland. So they're not united kingdoms, they're two separate kingdoms, but he's the king of both. It's amazing. So Henry VIII wanted it all to be the Tudors, and now it's all the Stuarts. The Stuarts have won out in some sense. But it turns out that James is not going to transform England into a Presbyterian country. He kind of likes the Church of England. He likes the idea of bishops. And he famously says, no bishops, no kings. For him, the idea of having a general assembly, I mean, it's just, it's just too Republican for him. He doesn't like that. He likes the idea of the hierarchy, where he's at the top. That's what he wants. So he's not going to export Presbyterianism to England. He doesn't hate the Presbyterians. He's not going to go to war against the Presbyterians, but he's not interested in bringing it into England. He's totally into the whole Anglo thing. He loves England. It has better properties, big palaces. He just loves the whole thing. And he also becomes a real estate developer. He's an eager colony. So we proved Jamestown, our first permanent English settlement in what is now the United States, 1607. Closer to home, Ireland has for centuries been a problem for England. So there was the Irish problem for centuries. What is the problem? The problem is that the Irish don't want to be conquered by the English. That's the problem. It's a problem for us. We want to control you. And the Irish say, no thanks. There is no Reformation in Ireland. There's no John Knox or Martin Luther in Ireland. It's Gaelic, it's Catholic, and it's Floyd. Now, I didn't go into any great detail here, but after there's numerous wars, the English have been colonizing or attempting to colonize Ireland for many years. Queen Elizabeth I was voted of that, and the English set up little duchies and so forth. Duchies is probably the wrong word, but little fiefdoms all around outside of Dublin. Anything beyond that, so there was an English controlled area in Ireland. Anything above, anything outside of that was beyond the pale. That was the pale, that's where the expression comes from. But it didn't work out very well because the English lords were there for a while, sort of intermarried the Irish, they become Irish, and more Irish than they were English, so it never worked out. But in this case, and also there was a big war. A lot of the Irish nobility left, and there's a lot of land available. So Ulster is only 20 miles from Scotland, and there's huge amounts available suddenly. This is an opportunity, you gotta move fast on this. So this is the opportunity that James sees. Through private investment and public grants, Ulster is offered to lowland Scots. Why lowland Scots? Because the Highland Scots speak Gaelic like the Irish, and there's a lot of kinship between the Highland Scots and Ireland. So James is firm about this. Lowland Presbyterian Scots, you gotta be Protestant, and you gotta be Protestant. You've been English or Scotsman, you gotta be Protestant. Lowland Scots, there's an opportunity. So land is more affordable, and as advertised, more arable than what they have. Better opportunity for them. And as King James, this is a quote, King James knew the adventurous nature of the Scots and the appeal of a good bargain. Feudalism was not transplanted to Ulster, although I think almost all of them came over as some sort of tenant. And so they're still peasants, basically. But the passage to Ulster in the view of Labour and others was to strive towards individualism. There's a trademark which will carry on through the whole story of the Scots-Irish. So there's Ulster. So there's 4 provinces of Ireland we've heard about. And there's Ulster at the very top. And I don't know if you could read this. Anybody, wait, so this little Scottish counties, Tyrone, the Donegal, English, Derry, Armagh, when I pronounce that correctly. These were Scottish, they were privately developed through the crown. The state Irish. This is a mix of English and Scottish. That's our focus here is this is Northern Ireland or Ulster. So where I grew up in Pennsylvania, there are a lot of, the Scots-Irish came through and then they went on their way. And there's places like Antrim Township and Greencastle, which is a place in Northern Ireland, Letterkenny, county seat Chambersburg. Benjamin Chambersburg was a Scots-Irish fellow. So there's a lot of vestiges of that where I grew up. And the Scots are you happy forevermore? Well, the Scots are really ever happy. That's a good question. And they hear there's some really good land available. Rivers are flying. Just 3,000 miles to the west. And it's a great opportunity. The natives are pretty friendly. Somebody said that, no problem there. Okay, now, so why is John Knox? So he went to the Scotland trip. There's quite a few of them. So we saw that, remember? So my memory is that, so there it is. Parking space number 23. You think John Knox, so apparently John Knox said he wanted to be buried within 20 feet of St. Giles Cathedral where he preached. And so that was agreed to, he was buried there. And then what they found better use for the graveyard, what happened to the graves, I don't know. But there's his, so Scots were taking advantage of better opportunity. So anyway, that I think is basically it. I really haven't talked much about the Scots-Irish actually, but this is all leading up to it. But I'm trying to convey to you that Scotland, it's a tough place, and it's a tough history. And a lot of the Scots who went to Ulster were tough people. Independent people, more and more independent, and they're going to find a great opportunity in the American colonies and eventually make their way down to Mecklenburg County. It's not very good end it, but what time is it? It's early.
10 minutes early.
Okay, so since it's 10 minutes early and we're in Sunday school, why don't we talk about it? There's a lot you know. I think a lot of you know a lot more about this than I do. I sort of read this on the fly, but. What are your, yes, because you here believes they are of Scots-Irish descent. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. What do you think?
About a month ago, I received a box of things from my mother's cousin, the children never married. And it was her VAR application. It included her history company, which is not his history. She got it for everything. Anyway, I had never heard this my whole life, but she descends from somebody named William Turner, who was a Covenanter. And left Scotland and went to Ireland and left Ireland and came to the colonies in the 1600s. So it was a very quick move for him.
Yes.
But I thought that was fascinating because I have lots of connections coming in, but I had never paid attention that this was my grandmother's heritage. So, the direct heritage. And I was like, okay, I remember when we were in Scotland learning a little bit about the Covenanters, but it didn't come into my brain. But now I've got a whole thing to research next year.
Right. Yeah, I have a sense that Stevenson is a very common name in southwest Scotland and Ulster. But I've not been able to, the Stevenson descended just shows up in Maryland somehow, seriously, so I can't make the connection. All I can say for sure is he died with $75, the statement was $75 for. But it reminds me that I was reading that, so the whole thing about Highland Scotland versus Lowland Scotland, Robert Louis Stevenson, another relative, he wanted to be a Highland Scot so badly that he couldn't find any traces of Stevenson's having a clan or anything like that. But he read somewhere that the McGregors had to change their surname because they're under fire for something. So all the McGregors decided to change their surnames so they couldn't be tracked. And Robert Louis Stevenson concluded that he must be a McGregor. That's not desperate.
This might not
Yes,
be
that's
a
lovely.
bigger question, but any idea of like how many Scots went to Ulster? How many of us?
Yes, I do. It's in the book. I haven't read it yet.
I don't plan to.
That hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands, actually, there are like three successive migrations, and the number, I mean, these are big numbers for that period of time, but hundreds of thousands came in. And basically, I think this is gonna be true, I'll read more about it, but they came in, a lot of them came into Pennsylvania. Not just Pennsylvania, so they thought, so they're just speaking, why not go to New England? Because the Puritans are in New England, they're fellow Calvinists. But the Puritans don't like anybody except for Puritans, so they're not really, there's are some, but the Pennsylvania was, so Maryland was Catholic. And Lord Baltimore Catholic, the Anglicans were on the seaboard, Virginia, North Carolina, and so forth. It's the middle colonies, in particular Pennsylvania, because William Penn had an open policy towards religion. He had the first synagogue was in Philadelphia, you know, so a lot of them came into Delaware, to Newcastle, Philadelphia, and then settled with the Route 30,
Yeah.
Lancaster, York, Gettysburg, then down to, no, they went elsewhere too. A lot of them came down, or up the valley, up the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah.
Into the Piedmont, so very heavily in Beckham County and South Carolina.
Interstate 81 wasn't there then.
Yeah, not 81, but 15, and 15 parallels, 81, and 15 was the old trail.
Correct.
Yeah.
Old line. That's basically somewhat accurate, perhaps.
Different subject, but it just piqued my interest when you refer to, well, Henry VIII believing, you know, that he was the head of the church or saints, you know,
Yes.
that whole, and everybody, yes, except, but, and then down into James and so forth, being so closely tied to the church. And that whole idea of the divine right of kings or monarchs. I read enough about Elizabeth II that I think that they really believed that they were. I mean, it's hard for us to believe that anybody believes that they're endowed by God, you know, to carry out his will on earth. But I think she really believed that, and that she tried to carry that out. I don't know about Charles, you know, how he feels about that, but anyway, I just hadn't, you know, anything that you've read or thought about that whole idea is just really interesting to me. I think she seriously tried to carry out her duty as being God's representative.
This is Elizabeth the First.
Elizabeth second.
The first probably too, but I was just not Elizabeth who's died, yeah.
I do know that James the Sixth's son, Charles the First,
Yes.
gets himself in real hot water.
Well, and yeah, he was so far to the, whatever, right now, and he targeted the theater and so forth.
Yeah.
You know, Shakespeare had a hard time dealing, you know, he abandoned any kind of street theater and all that kind of stuff because he thought that was not godlike, I guess. It was people that were imitating, you know. Yeah, it's not right.
I didn't know much about this, was the second one she believed in. From some. That's just pretty good.
But it is, I mean, I don't know, it's just something that was just a tradition with them, or that, you know, how much they've really, I don't know, or is a way to maintain control.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, the Sun King was a Louis the 14th, or I think they all preferred that perspective, and like others to appreciate the fact that they were most divine. So, yeah. The rest of this, listen, if you like podcasts, I haven't listened to one
It's the
podcast,
best.
huh?
The rest of history is the best.
So these two guys, Dominic Westbrook and Tom Holland, are the sponsors, two British academics, and it's really entertaining. And Tom Holland is a well-known academic. He's written vast tomes of stuff, but they get through all kinds of different kinds of history, and it's very It's very entertaining. It's been a lot of, the whole series, like 6 episodes on Queen Ma, the Mary Queen of Scots. So it's highly entertaining. Yes, Dave.
Well, practical matter, you hear about kings and queens favoring Protestantism or Anglicanism or Catholicism. For the rank and file person, say I'm a Catholic, king says, nah, don't like it, we're gonna be Protestant. What's that do for me? What happens?
Yeah.
I mean, do I just flip a switch?
Yes. I think so. So, where's John? John back, John Hart. So what is that phrase, that was employed in Germany? The prince gets to choose the religion. You know, for whatever it is, but anyway, but so in Germany, I think it was after the Treaty of Westphalia, so 1640. So the prince, he can decide whether to be Protestant. My principality is going to be Protestant, and they can change to Catholicism. And there's at least one example where the prince went Protestant and then changed to Catholic and Protestant again. So everybody in his little principality had to do the same thing. Yes, but
I think the quote is, you choose the God that chooses you. For the among the monarchs, because there is a little bit of that faith switching. Where you think that it shores you up. And what, the Henry VIII example lets you, that is what you want to do, but that was the raising of that current.
What was the sense of retribution? The switch was flipped and you didn't, the day before, what happened to you if you say, I don't want to change?
if you're a peasant, people are peasants.
Oh, okay.
As people say.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.